Good evening and welcome to James Cook University in Singapore. If this is your first time to our campus, a very warm welcome. My name's Nigel Marsh. I'm currently a Professor of Clinical Psychology here. This is my second time in Singapore, my second time at James Cook University. I worked at James Cook in Singapore about 8 years ago when we were on the old campus, and I went away for 8 years and I've now come back. Tonight, obviously, we're here to talk about our postgraduate professional training program in clinical psychology. We've got 90 minutes. I'm not going to talk for 90 minutes, which should make you feel a little bit happier. And I want to do the talk in a broader context about psychology and professional training, because some of you may be here not sure whether or not you want to do clinical psychology. And if I talk about other types of psychology, professional psychology you can do, you may be interested in doing that. We don't want you to come and do our program because you can't think of anything else. So all professional training is a lot of money for you or your parents and a lot of hard work. So it's important that you understand what you're going to do. And one of the problems we have with psychology in general, and clinical psychology in particular, is people don't actually know what it is. I'm not from around here. I come from a little country at the bottom of the world called New Zealand. It's a little bit bigger than Britain, but they've got 63 million people, we've got 4.5. And I've run clinical programs in 7 different countries and worked in various jurisdictions, we call it. So I've taught an American clinical program in an American university in Lebanon, I've taught in the UK, I've taught in Australia, I've taught in New Zealand, I've taught an Australian program in Singapore, and I'm now doing that again. And one of the things that's obvious when you move around the world is that people have different customs. Where I come from, it's considered very rude to talk about yourself, and people will shut you down quite quickly. When I started working in Asia, I realised that most of the audience expect you to talk a bit about yourself, and it's part of the validity. I suppose people check you on the internet anyway. So as a compromise, I'll give you a very brief rundown. So I trained as a clinical psychologist. I've worked as a clinical psychologist. I returned to university and did a PhD, a research degree. And I like research, and I stayed at university training clinical psychologists and doing research. Clinical psychology is very big. My area has been rehabilitation. So when most people think of clinical psychology, they think of mental health. And that's certainly the origins of it. I haven't worked in mental health in a very long time. Most of the people I work with have traumatic brain injuries or strokes or dementia. I've worked in amputees, people with spinal cord injuries, and burns and plastics. I was a consultant at burns and plastics unit. Today, over the last couple of days, we've had one of our adjunct professors in clinical psychology, a colleague of mine visiting from the University of East Anglia in England. And that's the biggest program in the UK, the University of East Anglia. And what she was saying today, that a large number of their graduates are going into an area called clinical health psychology. So they go and work with people with diabetes, dementia, and basically areas I've worked in, burns and plastics, amputations, etc. So it's a very broad area. So that's all about me. Work basically in neuro rehab. I've taught in 7 different countries. And as I said, this is going to be a general talk, and at the end you'll obviously have a chance to ask questions. But there's not much point in me starting by telling you, this is our program, this is how you apply to get into it, because you can get that on the internet. But we'll end with that. Most of you have got an undergraduate degree in psychology, otherwise you wouldn't be here. When we get to the point of entry requirements, the entry requirements for our program are quite specific. They require an APAC degree or equivalent. If you haven't got one of those. So you've got an American degree. That's not equivalent. You can do a fourth year here, and a lot of people will do a fourth year to get an Australian honours equivalent. So there are ways into the program. So when you see the selection criteria, if you think, well, I haven't got one of those, that's the end of it. It probably isn't. There's usually ways into it. What is psychology? People get confused about this, and those of you who've got degrees in psychology know that one of the worst things you can do at a dinner party is tell people you're studying psychology, because either they ignore you because they think you're reading their mind, which is something about them, not about you, or they corner you later and want to talk about a friend of theirs who has a problem. So I used to say I'm a behavioural scientist, and that was two long words, so people never asked me what that meant. So psychology is the study of behaviour. We don't read minds, we don't practice witchcraft, we study behaviour. And using the scientific method. And the one thing you will remember after tonight is this guy's still going to talk about science a lot. There are a number of different ways that people accept you can find the truth. For psychology, the way to the truth is science. If that is not part of your personal belief system, that's fine. Don't come and try to join us because you won't fit. So science is about empirical, validated treatments, not about people who are born with special powers. It's the study using the scientific method of primarily human behaviour. A lot of psychologists, the majority of psychologists work with humans. Some don't. I did my master's degree in an animal welfare laboratory. It was part of an agricultural research station. All the animals you see doing amazing things on TV, they were trained by psychologists. But primarily human. Incorporates the study of brain and behaviour. People have trouble with the biology or the biological aspects, but if you've got no brain equals no behaviour, right? We can replace hearts, livers, lungs, kidneys, can't replace the brain. So when I'm talking to school kids who are interested in psychology and they haven't done biology, they stopped at about year 7, they're going to have a problem. So understand and predict and change human behaviour. The change bit is what clinical psychologists are mainly involved in. We need to understand, explain why people do what they do. Our American friends think they invented everything. That's not correct. Psychology didn't start in America, it started in Germany. And a little lad at the University of Pittsburgh. So 1879, does that mean it's old or young? It's not as old as physics, and certainly nothing's as old as mathematics. But it's older than IT or computer systems. It's a lot older than computers. So that's what it is. And those of you who've done undergraduate will know that. When you've got an undergraduate degree in psychology, you can go and do a lot of things. And these are not imaginary titles. These are titles of our former graduates. We bring them and we say, what are you doing now? Have you managed to convince your parents to pay for you to go backpacking around the world for 2 years? Are you doing further study? Are you employed? If you're employed, what's your job title? So that's a selection of job titles. And one other thing I should say, because I'm not from around here, I may sound a bit different. If I speak too fast, ask me to slow down. I do start to speak fast. It just becomes white noise. Voice you being here. So feel free to ask me to slow down. So this is what you do. So when you finish your undergraduate degree, you've got 4 options. You can convince your parents to pay for you to go on a long holiday. You can get a job, or you can go on to further study. And there's 2 types of further study. There's an academic route, which you go and do a postgraduate degree by research. And that's for people who basically want to work in universities or work as researchers. And one of the big changes that's happened at James Cook Singapore since I was last year is we now have postgraduate research degrees. So we have people doing Masters of Philosophy and PhDs in psychology. So that's one route. The fourth route, which is what we're here to talk about tonight, is a professional route. So here you go and you do postgraduate training and you become a psychologist. And there's a number of branches of applied psychology. So psychology graduates are prepared for professional training to become a psychologist. A bachelor's degree in psychology or a bachelor's honours does not make you a psychologist. The undergraduate degree does not make you a psychologist. You get a bit of repetition, it helps with that. Postgraduate training is required preparation for a professional career in psychology. So when you finish your undergraduate, you get a job, go on holiday, go and do a research degree, or go and do a professional degree. And so what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the night is professional degrees. Mainly clinical, but I want you to understand the varieties out there. Obviously, I'm a clinical psychologist, we run a clinical program, but part of our role is to give people good academic advice, and that's what I'm trying to do tonight. So, there's lots of types of professional or applied psychology, but different jurisdictions have different understandings of what these are. And because I've worked in different universities around the world, my general approach to advising students is to say that, if you do this degree here in this country we're in, you can go out and get a job and spend the rest of your life here, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a perfectly good choice. But if you get on a plane and go somewhere else, when you get off the plane, you want what you're holding in your hand to be worth something. And this is important, very important. When I was your age, I was a student. You are not students. You are customers. And people are selling you stuff. Our job is to tell you what these things are. There are lots of programs out there that sound good and aren't worth anything. I get a little bit frustrated with having former students come back to my office 3 years later in tears because I've gone to the UK or Australia and paid lots of money and worked really hard for this master's degree that sounds wonderful. Masters of Behavioural Science sounds wonderful. Masters of Clinical and Health Psychology sounds wonderful. Both worthless. Both have no credibility with professional degrees of societies at all. So you have to become an aware consumer. You have to learn, we have to go and talk to old people like me who can point you in the right direction on how to judge stuff. Right? If I want to sell you a car, I want you to buy the car and go away. I don't care whether the car breaks down tomorrow. I just want to sell you the car. Now the reason I'm talking like this is because I am tired of having former students. When I was working in Malaysia for 7 years, that happened a lot. And those of you that are from Malaysia know Malaysia, the ringgit ain't worth much when you convert it to British pounds or Australian dollars. So these families had slaved very hard to get the child through a master's degree that wasn't worth anything. I had a very angry man come and see me about 3-4 months ago because he'd come back from Britain with one of these nice sounding degrees and he wanted to know how much advanced standing we'd given for our program. I said nothing. He said, but I paid. I said, that's not my, it's not an accredited program. It's not worth anything. And actually, this may be the bit that made him angry, if you applied, the fact you've done one of these would tell me that you're not very smart. You didn't do your homework. And my colleague from University of East Anglia who was here, she was telling some of our students exactly the same things. They want to go and do the program, some of them want to go and do a program in Britain. She says, if you turn up to our program, you apply to our program, you've got a research master's degree, smart person. You've got 3 or 4 years practical experience, we think smart person. You've gone and done one of these fake degrees that sound really good. They come from a real university. It's not something you order over the internet and pay £20 for. We are not going to give you any credit. You get no extra points in our calculations for who we're going to take into our program. So you need to understand the market, and that's why I'm sort of going through some of this stuff. So Australia, being Australia, has 9 types of recognised psychology. This is the biggest number in the world. I'm only talking about English-speaking jurisdictions because I'm monolingual. So Australia, the Australian Psychology Board of Australia recognises 9 types of professional psychology. In Britain, the Healthcare Council only recognises 7. So it doesn't recognise community psychology, and it doesn't recognise clinical neuropsychology. In Britain, clinical neuropsychology is a post-clinical psychology program. So you train as a clinical psychologist, and then you go and train as a clinical neuropsychologist. So, let me know if I'm going too fast, because it's about to get a little bit sort of odd. So, what we've got in Australia is 9 areas of practice endorsement. In the UK, the Health and Care Professions Council, which regulates all health professions in the UK, recognises 7 areas or domains of practice. So like I said, not community and not clinical neuro. Our friends in the cold country of Canada, the Canadian Psychological Association accredits 4 types. And this is the number of programs in the country. In Canada, you have 31 clinical psychology programs. You have 3 clinical neuropsychology programs, 5 counselling psychology programs, and 4 school psychology counselling programs. In the United States of America, the American Psychological Association has 4 types. They have 242 clinical psychology programs in the US, 76 counselling, 70 school, and then they have 13 that are combinations of these. We go from 8 in Australia, 9 in Australia to 7 plus 1 in the UK, 4 in Canada, really only 3 in the US. So you're beginning to see, you've got psychology degrees, you're beginning to see the trend in the data. Big countries, big jurisdictions don't have a lot of specialties. There's only 26 million people in Australia. There's 63 million in Britain. They don't have any there in Canada. It's very cold. So people don't stay there. My favourite model is the European model. So those of you interested who follow education are aware of a thing called the Bologna process. Now, in Europe, what would happen is if you did your bachelor's degree in Spain, you couldn't go to France and do your master's and then go on to the Netherlands and do your PhD. So a number of years ago, the Europeans got together in a place called Bologna, which is the place where the first modern university, so a few years ago, and worked out a framework so that students could transfer around Europe. And psychologists in Europe said, well, we've got to follow this ourselves. So they launched this thing called European Psychology. And it was, it came out in 2009. It's a 3 plus 2 plus 1 model, which I won't bother going into. But 24 countries currently follow the Europsych model. So if you can get people from 24 countries, and particularly psychologists from 24 countries, agreeing on something, you're probably getting pretty close to the truth, just by sheer weight of numbers. And the Europsych has 4 categories: clinical and health, which they combine, education, work in organisations, and other. And for a very long time now, when students, so over 20 years, students come and say, I want to be a psychologist, but I'm not sure what type. I've always given the same advice. So there's only three really worth choosing from. And those are the three. So when we come back to what I said before, the Australians in the 9, basically what we have is clinical psychology, education developmental psychology, which is also called school psychology, and organisational psychology. These three do not overlap. Clinical psychologists who got, and those of you old enough to remember there was a character called John F. Kennedy in that era who got sick of working in large psychiatric hospitals, moved into the community, became community psychologists. Clinical psychologists who work in prisons or with youth offenders, I've worked with youth offenders, are called forensic psychologists. Organisational psychologists also work with high performance people, CEOs of multinational companies. They take that high performance and work with athletes and they become sports psychologists. Health psychologists are clinical psychologists who, a bit like me, work outside of mental health. And counselling psychology are clinical psychologists who basically want to do more preventative work. They work with people with problems of everyday living. Right? So I'm going to spend some time, although we're here to talk about clinical psych, I'm going to take 2 more slides to talk about the other big 2. Because it has happened before that we have had people who come into our program, they apply, they get in. That's hard to get in. And after about 6 months, things aren't going well. And you sit down and you talk to them, and they really want it to be an EdSpsych. But there's no EdSpsych program. So they're unhappy, we're unhappy, they'll take we're unhappy because they're unhappy. It's hard to pass when you're unhappy, particularly in a program this intensive. And they took the place of someone else who actually wanted to be a clinical psychologist. So I didn't clear it with my bosses from marketing, but I want to spend some time talking about the other 2. So if that's what you want to do, you get that clear in your head. I'm not going to talk about these ones because these are all sort of hangers-on. So, organisational psychology. These are the psychologists that have the handmade leather Italian shoes. They're the ones who make the money. You see a psychologist driving a Maserati, they're an organisational psychologist. It's the science of people at work. And what they do, people have this strange idea that they work for the employer to beat up the employees and get more work out of them. That's not how it happens. Happy employees are more productive. If you take care of your workers, they will take care of you. So organisational psychologists spend their time finding ways to make people happy at work. Because happy people at work are productive people. Accident rates go down, everyone wins. So they analyse organisations and people, they devise strategies to recruit, motivate, develop, change. They're also involved in, and particularly nowadays, involved in when industries basically disappear, helping people to retrain. One of the things, when I walk into a classroom now, one of the things that we know is that the first job that those students get probably won't exist in 10 years' time. And there are papers on this from international organisations. The nature of employment is changing. I've had 2 careers in my whole life. I've only ever been one of 2 things, an academic or a clinical psychologist. Any of you who are about 23, you're going to have 5. That's not 5 different jobs. That's 5 careers for most people, because things are changing. So they're also involved in that. What do they actually do? They work with organisations, teams, and individual employees. They want to improve performance, increase effectiveness and productivity in the workplace. But you don't do that by beating people. You do that by giving people a job that makes them feel good. And sometimes you get the situation where people get promoted beyond their capabilities or their areas of interest. Some people, and I've worked, I think about there in New Zealand, you work with lots of different cultures. I work a lot with Pacific cultures, so Samoans, Tongans, Fijians, etc. And they used to give us a hard time that they go to work so they can live. We go to work to live. They never understood it. So they didn't care what their job was. They were quite happy to do what we would consider mundane, unrewarding jobs, provided it gave them money so they could spend time with their family. So those types of value systems. For some people, what you do for your job is part of your identity. But for other people, it's not. Your identity is your family and your friends. And what you do to earn the money is really quite irrelevant. So understanding that mix is important. They basically enhance people's well-being. I mean, psychology really is about professional psychology, applied psychology. It's really about looking at people's well-being. If you don't care whether people are happy or not, don't do professional psychology because you'll be really bad at it. You won't want to go to work. So it's about improving people's experience at work. And it's a big area, it's a growing area. Personnel selection is huge. You know? If I have a friend of mine, I did clinical, she was really smart, she did organisational psychology, I think she already owns a couple of islands. One of her jobs was to select someone to run a pulp and paper plant in Canada that was worth a few $1 billion. So she got paid a large amount of money to find the right person to run that plant. Really good skills. I mean, I got to admit, she was really good at it. I couldn't even get it. But they base their practice on science. Again, applied psychology is data-driven. It's not about having powers or being born with special gifts. We train people to be psychologists. So that's org psych. Ed psych or school psych, concerned with the development and learning of people throughout their entire lifespan, but concentrate on the school years. We have a number of people doing clinical psych who want to work with children, and that's fine. If you want to work with children in schools, go and do ed psych. Because we don't teach people the curriculum knowledge about that sort of training in schools to go and be an ed psych. What we do is some of our students do educational assessments of children, but we hire an ed psych to supervise that. That's not our area. So if you want to work in schools with kids, do ed psych. What do? They diagnose disabilities, disorders, autism spectrum disorder. There's a lot of work in that area. Development, learning, behavioural difficulties. And they are supposed to design effective treatment programs. So it's not just about diagnosing the kid, finding a way of getting them out of mother tongue because that's what their parents want. It's about also designing interventions. Okay, so that's org psych, ed psych. They are the two. Let's talk about clin psych, which is why you sort of came here and I've finally got around to it.